Hi guys, just going to walk you through this question from Traditional Tradesman, talking about the long pips hitting, and he's saying he's having a little bit of trouble getting consistency in hitting with his long pips. He's a bit worried that it's because he's fiddling with his technique too much. He goes on to say that his coach is telling him he needs to start with a slightly open blade, take the ball towards the bottom of the blade, then using the forearm and wrist, flick the blade forward and a bit to the right, rotating the head of the blade so that at the end of the shot, the tip of the blade is almost facing towards the ceiling. But as he mentions here, he's seen other players who don't seem to use much wrist in hitting. So he's wondering also that they seem to go more up and to the right rather than forward and to the right. So what Traditional Tradesman is wondering is wrist or no wrist and up or forward. And I think, as I was mentioning just on the website, there's people, the usage of wrist is really an individual thing, the amount of wrist that you use. It's a personal preference. So I wouldn't say that you have to use wrist in it or you shouldn't use wrist in it. But if you're going to use wrist, then I think there's a couple of things to keep in mind, which I want to talk about now. Firstly, I'm going to talk about this up or forward. What I'm finding, at least, is that if I'm too close to the table, now if you imagine this white line here is the end of the table, if I'm too close to the end, my up becomes very much up like that, because I haven't got room to take the ball where I want to take it, which is about there. I end up hitting the ball late. So it does become very up rather than a forward stroke. Mostly when hitting with long pips, especially as he does mention against underspin, what I would tend to recommend is both up and forward. So not this and not that, but that roughly 45-degree upwards and forwards to get forward power, but also to get some lift. So from my recommendation, I would say it's not one or the other, both upwards and forwards. What I find is I actually hit a lot better with my long pips. If again, that's the end line, I hit a lot better if I'm this far back. So instead of contacting the ball tight in, I'm actually contacting the ball kind of there, and then I get more power and I get better lift. If I'm too close, I can sometimes get lift, but I don't get enough forward power and the ball still ends up in the net. So forward and upwards. Wrist or no wrist in terms of basically this up and to the right and cocking. On my backhand with the pips, I still use wrist. I don't try and lock my wrist out and do that without any wrist at all. I will still use wrist. Now there's a couple of reasons for that. The reasons why I do it, just to mention, is firstly because on my backhand loop, my backhand attack, I also use wrist. So by using wrist on the long pips, it's easier for me to be consistent. I don't have two really different strokes. They become more similar. My backhand loop becomes that, my pips is the same. Obviously it's not going to be quite the same bat angle, but the wrist movement I use is roughly the same. So there's less things to change. Whereas if I use my big wrist cock on my backhand for the inverted, and then on the long pip, if I try to do it with no wrist, I've got two very different shots, which means that it's harder for me to play the stroke a little bit, and also it's very much immediately obvious to the opponent that this versus that are very different, whereas this or that look a lot more similar. So those are two arguments, I guess, for keeping whatever wrist you use for your inverted attack. Try using the same amount of wrist roughly for your long pip attack. You'll find you'll stay more consistent, and you'll also find that you'll trick the opponent a bit more. one big proviso, and one thing that I don't like here that the coach is saying, is that, well, at least something to watch for. He's saying that the coach says to start with a slightly open blade. Now, I will start quite often with an open blade, depending on how much backspin. If there's not so much backspin, I may go a bit closed or whatever. You know, but it's not the starting with the open blade, but that seems to imply that you finish with a closed blade. And that, to me, I don't think is such a good idea. I think whatever bat angle you pick, if you're going to go open, that's the angle you keep through the stroke for as long through the hitting zone as you can. Don't start open and finish closed, so don't change your bat angle through contact. If you change your bat angle through contact, you're asking for problems because you're going to be at the wrong bat angle, right bat angle, wrong bat angle, which means that you've got to time it perfectly to get the roughly right bat angle. Whereas if you always keep the bat angle the same, whatever it is, and you use your wrist to add to the pace of the bat, but don't change bat angle so much, all through that hitting zone, you're at the right angle, you're at the right angle, you're at the right angle, all the way through. You can make a mistake with your timing and you still get the result. So, I guess to sum up what we're saying here is up or forward. It's not one or the other. Generally, I would say both. If you're too close to the table, you end up hitting very much up, because deep balls, you've got no room to swing forward. You've got to swing up. If you're at a good depth from the table, you'll actually find up and forward is natural, is much easier. In terms of wrist or no wrist, do whatever you're doing comfortably on your inverted side. Do roughly the same with the long pips. Don't change bat angles through the stroke. Keep the angle, whatever angle you pick. Use your wrist to add to the speed of the bat, but don't break bat angles. Don't flip bat angles. Keep the bat angle the same, and you'll find your consistency will be much better. The last thing in terms of consistency is remembering that possibly if you're being a little bit inconsistent in your hitting, if you're trying to hit too hard, if you're pushing the envelope too much with your hitting, trying to get too much out of the pips, then even though your technique may be very good, if you're trying to hit 1 centimetre above the net with a lot of pace, a small mistake will result in a miss. So perhaps you're hitting too hard and not giving the ball a little bit more time to get down to the table. So possibly taking a fraction of pace off the ball and aiming, instead of this high above the net, aiming that high above the net, that may improve your consistency as well. So it could be just a matter of, you're really pushing the limit of what you can do a little bit as well. The final thing, depending on how grippy your pips are, is that if your pips have a reasonable amount of grip, they are going to react to what spin is on the ball. And if you're not reading that spin very well, then you may get the wrong bat angle a little bit, and that may contribute to your missing the ball. So you've also got to watch the opponent's spin. That will help your consistency as well. So as I said, I didn't really want to type all that out, but it's a good question. The amount of wrist that should be used. Forehand's no different. Whatever you do naturally on the forehand, do naturally with your long pips, and you'll find a certain amount of consistency coming in. I find that easier. So thanks for the question. I hope that answers it, and if not, if there's something that it sparks that you want a bit more clarification, just let me know and I'll come back to you. So thanks for that.